Hey you guys, welcome back to another one of my videos. If you're new here, my name is Holly and thank you so much for watching. Before I get into it, I want to quickly give a shout out to the small business that I bought these earrings from. It's a little business called Art by Peach. I'll link her below if you guys want to check her out. Also, a quick disclaimer before I get into this video, I will be discussing topics of domestic violence as well as ending one's life. So if those things are triggering to you or just not topics that you want to listen to, then I would suggest you clicking off now. Oh, and also I've started linking all the resources that I use below just so you guys can get a better idea of where I get my information from. All the information that I get for these videos is information that I found on the internet and I'm just putting into one video. So yeah, I'll link it all below if you guys want to do extra reading or just know where I got my info from. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So today I'm going to cover the case of the murder of Jack and Jennifer Edwards. This case hits a bit different for me because I actually grew up around 25 minutes from where this case actually took place. But before we get into what happened, I need to give a bit of background on a man by the name of John Edwards. John was born on the 12th of July in 1950 and he actually grew up in Broken Hill. Now, there's not that much known about his father, or at least I couldn't find anything, but I do know that he grew up with his mother and he also had at least one sister. When John was about 17, he actually stole his mother's car and drove it all the way from Broken Hill all the way to Sydney. And they obviously had no idea that he was planning on doing this, and literally all he left them was a letter saying goodbye. I don't know what happened with the car, whether his mum ever got it back or not, because I couldn't find that info, but that is just wild to me. But after this, John had a whole bunch of different jobs, including serving time in the Australian Defence Force, and that saw him qualify as a Commando Green Beret on the 30th of June 1983. John was discharged from the army in 1989, and I believe after that he just did a bunch of financial related jobs. He was obviously quite smart in the sense of like money and whatnot, so he just went into that field. But let's talk a little bit about John's love life. From John turning 18 up to the year 2000, John actually had 6 partners and 8 children. And I feel like it's important I talk about this because it will give you guys a better insight into the type of person that John was. When John was 18, he started a relationship with a 17-year-old female who we will call Miss A. They started dating in 1968 and they had 2 children together not very long after that. I believe it was a little girl and a little boy. And by 1972 they were married, but they actually broke up a few years later in 1977. According to Miss A, after the 2 of them got married, she just felt like John was starting to show controlling behaviors. Like he wouldn't let her spend as much as she wanted at the grocery store. He would limit her, and she just felt like he was very unpredictable. One time in 1973 or 1974, the family actually went on a trip to America, and on this trip, Miss A actually uncovered love letters that John had that were between him and a random American lady. Miss A obviously at the time was very angry and upset, and she decided she had had enough, so she wanted to leave America and leave the holiday and come back to Australia. But John would only let her take one of the 2 children. So although she tried to take both of them, she wasn't allowed, so she took one. I think she took her daughter with her and came back to Australia, and John actually ended up pursuing a relationship with the American lady, and he just had his son with him. It didn't take long for John to ask Miss A to come back to America and get his son, and so she did. And about a year after that, John actually came back from America with his now American wife in tow, who we're gonna call Janet. And this part really confuses me because the court documents say that he was married to Janet, but he was also still married to Miss A. So I don't know if it's because one marriage was in America and one was in Australia. I'm assuming that's the reason that he could have these two different marriages. The relationship between John and Janet broke down pretty quickly after they got to Australia. From what I could tell, John wanted Miss A back, and so they got back together. But by 1977, they officially got divorced. The children wanted absolutely nothing to do with John, and John actually kidnapped one of his kids for a few days after the divorce, which is just so messed up. Like, I don't know what parent does that, but that's what happened. But not long after this, John actually met another lady who he started a relationship with. This lady we're gonna call Miss C, and again, they had 2 kids together, and again, John started showing signs of violence. On one occasion, Miss C recalled that John ran a cigarette lighter across a wooden coffee table, and he asked her if he should burn the house down. While Miss C and the 2 children that John and Miss C had together were sitting on the couch. The final straw in this relationship, though, was in 1987 when John actually threw a rolling pin at Miss C's head. John was in the shower that night, and Miss C packed up her kids and basically what she had on her back, and the 3 of them fled. John continued to intimidate Miss C and his kids for years after this event, though, and actually on one occasion he kidnapped one of those children and again did not return him for a few days. So that's the second time John has kidnapped one of his kids, and I'm sure you guys are starting to understand by now the type of person that John was. In 1989 to 1990, 40-year-old John started a new relationship with a lady who we will call Miss D. She was actually only 21 at the time, and together they had a child, which would be John's 5th child, but I don't believe that they were even together by the time that she gave birth. In 1990, John again found another woman who we will call Miss E. She had another baby with John, who was his 6th child, and she actually noted that while they were together, John would sleep with a machete next to his bed, which understandably she found really unnerving. After they broke up though and Miss E moved out, she said that John would turn up at her new address at all hours of the day uninvited, and he would also call her relentlessly. And she did go to the police to report this behavior, but at the time not much came of it. And eventually, by the time that her son was 10, they had completely cut ties and had nothing to do with John anymore. In 1995, John and Miss D got back together, although this time they didn't live together. But 3 years later, in 1998, they were actually still together, and on one particular day, John asked her to come over to his house. And his reasoning for her coming over was because he wanted to see his child that she had with him. But that was obviously not the real reason that John wanted her to come over, because when she went over there, John actually ended up assaulting her for hours that night. She went to the police, and although John was charged with common assault, the charges were actually dismissed not long afterwards. Miss F would be John's next partner, and that was from 1998 to 99, and they also had a child together. According to Miss F, when John found out that the child they were going to have was going to be a boy, John actually asked her to terminate the pregnancy. But Miss F didn't want to do this, and she said that John would physically assault her. He threw a phone at her and harmed her to the point that she was actually scared that she was potentially going to lose her baby while she was pregnant. But thankfully she didn't, and she actually went into labor not long afterwards. John drove her to the hospital, but she said that he left before the baby was even born. And understandably, they broke up not long after that. But John didn't stop contacting her after that. He would call relentlessly and turn up wherever she was uninvited. And in August of 2000, an apprehended violence order was taken out on Miss F's behalf against John, and it was granted in Parramatta local court for a period of 3 years. So now we're at the year 2000, and this is actually the year that John met Olga. Olga was 19 when she met John on an internet dating site. He was actually 30 years older than her and she lived in Russia at the time, but they seemed to hit it off pretty quickly, and Olga actually moved all the way to Australia to be with John. That same year that Olga moved to Australia, which was 2001, is the year that the two of them got married. And although this was Olga's first marriage, by this point it was actually John's sixth. The couple lived in Sydney on Sydney's Upper North Shore, around the suburb of Normanhurst, and they would actually go on to have 2 children together, the first being a little boy that they named Jack, who was born in September of 2002, followed by Jennifer, who was born in August of 2004. And by this time, John was well out of the army and working as a financial planner. Olga was very academically gifted and she used this to her advantage, and she actually studied law while her kids were really little. Growing up, Jack was someone who absolutely loved sports, in particular AFL. He played a lot of AFL and he was described as someone who was quite active and very endearing. A lot of people just liked him. He had a great personality, he was very lively and friendly, he had lots of friends, and he was also described as a little bit cheeky, but honestly, what young boy isn't a little bit cheeky? He was also very keen on gaming, and it was something that he would do quite often with his friends, and in particular one game that he really liked was a game called Fortnite. He was also a very much family oriented person. He was very protective of his younger sister and also very protective of his mum. Jennifer was a little bit quieter than Jack, but she absolutely loved animals. She had lots of pets growing up, from dogs to rabbits, and she even wanted to be a vet after she finished school. That was her plan, she told her teachers, and it was pretty realistic that she would get there because she was also, like her mum and dad, she was very academically gifted, and so she really committed to her studies. She also absolutely loved reading. She was definitely the quieter of the 2 siblings and a little bit more reserved, but that was just Jennifer, and she was happy that way. Things in the Edwards household weren't always as picture perfect as they seemed, as Olga, Jack and Jennifer all suffered abuse at the hands of John. Olga said that she noticed a change in John more so after the birth of her 2 kids. He'd be quite controlling and he would try to control the way she dressed. He liked when she wore short skirts and he didn't like when she cut her hair. He would always want her to have it really long. And when he was angry at her, he would give her the silent treatment for days unless she cried and begged for his forgiveness. He also controlled how much money she could spend, so he would only allow her a certain budget for groceries, and he refused to talk about his side of business things with her ever. 2012 was sadly the year that John started to exhibit those same controlling behaviors towards his 10-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter. One time, John hit Jack with a book so hard that it cut the child under his eye, and he would also do this thing called the finger treatment to the 2 kids, where if he felt like they were disobedient, he would pull their fingers back so hard that it caused them a lot of pain. When Jack was 11 in 2013, he actually tried one day to call the police in regards to his dad, but Olga stopped him and apologized on John's behalf. And I want to make it really clear that a lot of the time when there are victims of abuse, such as Olga, they can do this not because they want their children to succumb to harm, but more so because they're just so scared of what could happen to them that they don't want to irritate their partner any more than they are already irritated. And over the following 2 years, the relationship between Jack and John continued to deteriorate and involved verbal and physical abuse. Jack actually told Olga that he kept a bat in his room to protect himself against his dad, and Jennifer actually told her mum that she had a butter knife which she kept under her pillow, and she also made sure that she never turned her back on her dad. In 2015, the family went on a trip to Paris, and on this trip, John actually chased Jack all the way out of their accommodation and down the street. He then held Jack against the wall and was strangling him and and passers-by actually had to intervene. In November of 2015, John assaulted Jack again because, according to him, Jack had touched his phone without him letting him. And so John chased his child and cornered him and started to kick and punch him. On Christmas Day of that same year, which was 2015, Olga actually told John that she wanted a divorce, and John begged her not to leave, saying that he would change, and she decided to give him one more chance. I'm sure John's erratic behavior impacted the two kids that he had with Olga so significantly. I can't even imagine how just traumatic it would be to have a father like that. And Jack actually ran away from home not long after all of this. He was found the following morning around 3 a.m. in Bondi, and police took him back to his house. And when police asked him why he ran away, he said it was because of family difficulties. And by 2016, Olga had officially had enough, and she actually did file for divorce. She moved out of the house with her 2 teenage kids, and she actually moved into a friend's house. The children didn't want anything to do with their father, so they stopped seeing John around that same time too. Olga was still so scared of John though, because she just didn't know what he was capable of or what he would do. And so she really tried to make a point of not letting John know where she had moved. There was actually one point in time where Olga went back to the old house that John was still at to pick up a few things that she had left there after the divorce. And she ended up taking her boss. I think she worked at like a law firm. And so she took her boss with her just as extra security, I guess. So she felt more safe when she was going there, because John was there. John was not happy at the fact that Olga had brought her boss, who was called David Brown, by the way. And according to Olga, when David tried to enter the premises with her, John actually pushed him backwards. John then went to the police and filed a report against David, saying that David punched him. David, on the other hand, claimed that he unintentionally brushed past him. And so because there really wasn't enough evidence to prove either way, the case was dropped. A few months later, John called the police to notify them that he had had a break-in to his house, in which he believed the main suspect was Olga. Again, there was not enough evidence to prove that Olga was even there, so the case was dropped. For the next few months, John would also turn up unannounced at both his children's schools, and at Jenny's year 6 graduation, John actually came with a puppy that he tried to give her as like a graduation present. And the harassment didn't stop there. By December of 2016, John had also hired a private investigator to follow Olga around her work and home. And basically the main aim of him doing this was to see if she was seeing someone else now. And on the 29th of December 2016, Olga actually went to Hornsby Police Station to report some previous abuse that John had committed against her children, Jack and Jennifer. The thing was though, the incident category was recorded as domestic violence, no offense detected, which is actually really heartbreaking, because when it's categorized as domestic violence, no offense detected, it means that the police at the time felt like there was no offense. And if there's no offense that John has committed against these people, then there's nothing on his record to show that he's committed any crime against them, and that will become relevant a little bit later on. Around the same time, John was also attempting to get a gun license. He'd attempted to get one twice previously, and both times he'd been knocked back because of AVOs that had been put out against him in the previous years. The third time he applied though was a little bit different, as John had realized that if he applied for what was called a commissioner's firearms permit, he would have a better chance at getting a license. Now, I want to make it really clear that I am not someone who is well educated on firearms licenses and whatnot, but I did do a little bit of research, and this is kind of what I found. around. Firstly, in Australia, it's pretty hard to get a firearms license. The New South Wales Firearm Registry, which is basically an off-branch of the New South Wales Police, are the people who manage the firearms licenses that people apply for within Australia. From my understanding, at the time, this is all kind of changed now, but at the time there was a whole bunch of different categories that you could apply for a license under, and the categories that John applied for under was A, B and H, and I'll include a photo here of the different types of guns that you can have with these different licenses or different categories. But on the 18th of March 2017, John was actually granted commissioner's permits, which would allow him to participate in safety training. John wanted to do this training at the Ku-ring-gai Pistol Club, but he was actually declined from being accepted there because they felt like his character was aggressive. John was determined to get this training though, and so he just asked them if he could transfer to a different club called the St. Mary's Pistol Club, and he was allowed. I find it kind of wild that this is allowed when someone is declined from a certain club for being seen as aggressive and then they're allowed to join another club. I just feel like with guns, isn't that a red flag? Because I want to also add that when people accept people into these clubs, they can do like a background check where they can access people's past criminal history. And with John, there was multiple red flags in his history. There was a report from the 14th of March 2016 pertaining to domestic violence and a verbal argument between Olga and John. There was the interim AVO put in place back in 2011 in relation to JC, which was Miss C's child, and there was also an interim AVO put in place in 1993 in relation to Miss C. But for whatever reason, all this info was missed, and by the end of May 2017, John had completed his pistol safe handling course and he had bought himself a few rifles. For the rest of the year, John laid relatively low. He still kept tabs on Olga and the children, but for the most part, there was no contact between the two parties for the rest of the year. 2018 was going to be the start of a fresh year. Olga had moved to a place of her own with the two kids in West Pennant Hills, and she was just happily working at the law firm. Jennifer, as I mentioned before, was very academically gifted, and she had actually started high school, and she went to a high school in Gosford that was a selective high school. She was so proud of the fact that she had been accepted into this school and was happy making new friends. Jack was also living his life happy enough. He was, like I mentioned before, really into gaming, and in 2018 one of the games that was really popular was Fortnite, and so after school each day he'd go home and play it online with his friends. And on top of this, in February of 2018, the family law proceedings between John and Olga had been finalized, with Olga being the one granted full custody of the two children. Neither of the children were required to see John at all, and the only thing John was really allowed to do was receive school reports and also attend parent and teacher interviews, as long as none of the other three, so Olga, Jack or Jennifer, were there. I'm not entirely sure how John took that news, but all I can assume is, in general, people who are abusive don't normally react well to the fact that they're having that power taken away from them. In fact, statistics show that around 75% of women who are murdered by abusers are actually murdered either during or after the process of leaving their partner, and that's not what happened here. But I think that stat alone can help to sort of show just how abusers can react when they feel like they've lost control of whatever was giving them power. But while Olga, Jack and Jennifer were living their lives, John was also making plans of his own, and on the 13th of March he actually attended to a gun shop in Horsley Park where he bought a .357 Magnum Smith & Wesson revolver. And a month later, on the 17th of April 2018, John again attended the Horsley Park gun shop and purchased a Glock 17A semi-automatic pistol and ammunition. On the 25th of June that same year, John called a car rental place in Hornsby called Avis Car Rentals, and he called to book a sedan from Monday the 2nd of July to Saturday the 7th. And the day after John booked this car, he got in contact with an IT worker who he asked to come around and clear all the hard drives of his computer, as well as all the files and the search history of his laptop. I do wonder how often IT people get calls like this, because surely you would find it a little bit fishy if someone's like, I need you to come over and delete all of my files. But I don't know, obviously it didn't raise any red flags for this person, whoever the IT person was, because they didn't call the police or anything like that. And I guess as much as morally I don't necessarily agree with this, I can understand maybe they went over there and they were just seeing deleting all that info as them doing part of their job. You know, maybe they just don't ask any questions. I'm not sure either way. I'm just making assumptions there, but I don't know. I thought that was interesting. On July 2nd, 2018, John went to the Avis car company and he picked up the Commodore sedan that he had booked to have for about 5 days. And on July 4th, he made his way to St. Mary's Pistol Club where his guns were kept, and he picked up both of his pistols. He picked up his Glock 17A semi-automatic pistol and his .357 Magnum Smith & Wesson revolver, as well as the ammunition. And when he was there and getting these guns out, he actually slammed his locker so hard that the site foreman had to come and fix the locker. I'm not sure if it was out of anger or because he was flustered, but either way it was pretty jammed. The following day was Thursday, July 5th, 2018, and it was like any other Thursday for Olga and the two children. Olga drove Jennifer to Pennant Hills Station at around 7:30 so that she would make it to school on time. She then went back home to pick up Jack and drive him to school before she drove herself to work. Around 10:15 that same day, John actually made his way over to one of his friends' houses, a man by the name of Peter Foreman. John gave him a large express post envelope with 2 smaller envelopes stapled on the outside and literally just said, "If anything happens to me." And I'm assuming that Peter knew that he was implying, if anything bad happens to me, then you can open these up. And Peter understandably also thought this was pretty weird because John never turned up at his house uninvited, and especially with a whole bunch of envelopes. But he took them and then John left. John actually then made his way to one of his former partner's house, who was a lady by the name of Miss C, where he dropped off a number of boxes as well as a wooden chest that was hers but John had kept for 30 years. And thankfully, Miss C was not home at the time that he did this. At 3:15 that afternoon, John got back in his car. This time he had his Glock pistol with him, with at least 2 10-round magazines of ammunition, as well as a metal bar. John then made his way to Pennant Hills train station, where he arrived at around 3:26 that afternoon. He actually didn't park at the train station. He parked sort of adjacent in a hotel car park called the Pennant Hills Hotel, and he didn't even stay there for very long. I think he moved his car again so that he was sort of at a better angle to the train station, where he had a good view of the train station, but nobody coming out of the train station would really notice him that much. He then stayed there for the next hour and 15 minutes until the person that he wanted to come out of that station did, which was his daughter Jennifer. When Jennifer came out of that station, she did as she would any other day, and that was to make her way to a bus which would take her down the road to nearby her house. When she got on the bus, John followed her because I believe at the time he didn't actually know where she lived. So he followed her about 5 minutes down the road until she got off the bus, and then he continued to follow her for her 8-minute walk home, and she only realized that he was following her when she got home because he actually pulled up into the driveway, and she freaked out. Understandably, she completely freaked out. She dropped her bags and she sprinted down the hallway in the house to her older brother's room where he was gaming at the time. John then made his way into the house and he walked down the hallway to Jack's room where he found his 13-year-old daughter and 15-year-old son hiding, cuddled together under the desk. And this is when John got out his pistol and shot both of his children. He completely emptied the magazine, which is 10 bullets, before reloading and continuing to shoot. Both Jack and Jennifer passed away under that desk. Jennifer was in the fetal position with Jack almost on top of her as if he was trying to protect her body. The children had a neighbor who lived next door who was called Bruce Wilson, and he was actually sitting out the back of his house when all of this was going on, and he heard what he thought were gunshots, and so he went around to the front of the house to see what was going on, and he actually saw a rental car in the driveway and thought that that was a bit strange, and so made his way a bit closer to the house. And this is when a man came out of the house who we now know is John Edwards, but Bruce didn't know that at the time. And Bruce actually asked this man if everything was okay, which is such a bold move. And who we now know is John walked straight past him without saying a word and got in that rental car and drove away. Bruce then decided that the best thing to do was to walk up to the door because the front door was completely open, and that's when he yelled into the house asking if everyone was okay. And when he didn't hear anything back, he decided that the best thing to do was call the police. Police arrived not very long after that phone call, and when they went into the house they found the two bodies of Jack and Jennifer. And Olga actually arrived home from work not that long after this and obviously was so worried when she saw all the police outside of her house, and it didn't take her long to work out what had happened. And according to police reports, as soon as she found out what had happened, she just kept saying, "I know that John did this. I know John is involved. I just know it." Police then made their way to John's house in Normanhurst, which is a suburb nearby. They got to his house around 7:30 that night, and little did they know at the time that John had already actually taken his own life. But because they didn't know that at the time, they pretty much did a bit of a stakeout. So they stayed around the house just monitoring it all night until 6 a.m. the next morning, which is when they actually entered the house and found John in his room. He was sitting upright on the right hand side of his bed with his legs outstretched and his head tilted slightly to the left. His shirt was completely covered in blood and his left arm was slightly bent with the .350 Magnum Smith & Wesson revolver resting in the crook of his arm. The revolver cylinder contained 5 unfired rounds and 1 fired casing. At the back of his head there was a hole in the wall about the size of a 50-cent piece, and also in his top shirt pocket there was a train timetable of the trains between West Pennant Hills and Gosford, which, as I said before, was where Jennifer attended school. There was also printed text which appeared to describe Jennifer's movements between the high school and West Pennant Hills. Police wasted no time putting together a timeline of what happened in this case, and because this case was just so shocking at the time, news of it spread so quickly and so many people came forward to talk about their experiences with John or just provide relevant evidence. John's friend, Peter Foreman, informed police about the package that he had left with him the day before, and of course police did open it. The smallest of the 3 envelopes contained a key. The second and middle-sized envelope contained John's will and testament, and the largest of the envelopes actually contained a number of smaller envelopes which were all addressed to John's former partners, children, friends, and people that were associated with the family law proceedings, as well as $5,330 in cash which John wanted to be given to one of his former partners. And all of those envelopes actually contained personalized suicide notes. I feel like the fact that John decided to end his own life before he could be charged with murder is just so cowardly, and also just so sad because he really couldn't be held accountable for his actions. Olga struggled each and every day after the loss of her 2 beautiful children. She actually continued to live in the same house that she'd lived in with Jack and Jennifer, and it was only her living there, besides every now and then when her mum would actually come out from Russia to visit and stay with her. Sadly though, only 5 months after the deaths of Jack and Jennifer, Olga actually took her own life. There was actually an inquest into the deaths of John, Jack and Jennifer which took place in 2020. The purpose was to analyze in detail how these deaths could have occurred, and because of this, the inquest focuses a lot on firearms laws as well as domestic violence and the laws surrounding that and how that impacted Olga and the 2 children. And the final report from this inquest actually included 24 recommendations, which included police in New South Wales needing a lot more domestic violence related training, as well as training for firearm registry staff to recognize risks of domestic violence, and better information sharing between the gun registry, police and the family court. And I'm really glad about that last one. I feel like all of those things are so important, and although it's taken something just so horrible and tragic that should have never happened to make these changes, I can't help but feel like these changes are for the better of society. But with that, I come to the end of this video. Please feel free to comment below if you have any questions or opinions on this case or any others. Let me know if you have any other recommendations. I'm always open to doing cases that you guys have suggested. I also have my Instagram linked below if you guys want to see more of me. There is probably the best place to see more of me. And with that, I come to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in my next one. Bye you guys.